All right, my beautiful people, let's call this episode 50, 50, not 15, 50 of the Athletic Philosopher Podcast. Wow, we really made it, team. I am your always humble host, Jordan Goldstein, former professor of sport history, philosophy, psychology, sociology, wrote a few books, did a couple articles, got in a couple of controversies as a professor, so they don't let me profess in the university, which is all the more reason that I get to profess here and focus on applying things. You don't really apply much stuff in the university, which is great because I'm now knee deep into, maybe elbows deep, maybe head deep into coaching, lifestyle, fitness, life development, creative coaching. I do endurance training coaching as the travel prof on. I still am so bad with this mirroring here for those watching. For travel training. And I am very excited because I am, what's the best way to say this? Like reinvigorating a little bit of my own coaching programs. If you guys have been listening over the past year, you'll know that we've moved from a small rural village in Ontario to the North Shore suburbs in Chicago. And I've had to readjust on the fly what I'm able to do business-wise, coaching-wise, parenting-wise. And I'm now at this point where I feel like a phoenix kind of rising a little bit from the ashes. And I've been working really hard and diligently on creating a really neat group coaching program, which is based around some of the most key themes that I've been talking about in the past, 3 to 4 years that I've been doing this online creating, online coaching, and sort of real world coaching. That's been an offshoot of that online variation. And what I'm about to talk to you today about is simply a large overview of a concept that is animating the creation of this new group and is effectively a more refined way for me to communicate this deep philosophy that I have on the value, utility, and ultimately the best purpose of sports, physical activity, competition, and athletic training. So before we dive into that, let me fill up with motivation. Black coffee always hits. Always hits. Okay. So what do I want to talk about today? A lot of my recent podcasts have been completely improvised. In fact, mostly all my podcasts are completely improvised in terms of what I'm going to be talking about and how it relates to maybe like a pre-selected topic. And when I talk about relaunching sort of my coaching, it's all centered around a spiritual understanding of sports, right? A spiritual understanding of sports. And the philosophy, right, that undergirds this suggests that the true nature of sports are religious, and in order for us to extract the maximum value out of sports as an activity, we must conform ourselves to that nature. Now, this is an Aristotelian idea. It's related to virtue ethics, and it's also related to the ways in which we realize potential in the world. Now, Aristotle, we're talking about the philosopher Aristotle, right? From classical Greece, the creator of the Lyceum, and perhaps top 3 most influential philosophers of all time. And when we're talking about the best use of sport or conforming to the nature of the activity, Aristotle really points the way. And, not to get too far ahead of what I'm going to be talking about today, I want to talk to you today, if sports are spiritual, I want to know how practicing sports properly actually makes us holy. And this is something I've I'd say, wrestled with as a concept or as an idea. Like, how can playing sports bring you closer to God effectively, or bring you closer to a pure spiritual understanding of yourself, or as a way to live forthrightly and righteously and morally in the world, right? We know that athletes aren't always moral paragons in terms of their attitudes, their behaviors, and their actions. And in fact, it seems that the athletes, right, who reach the highest levels, like the elite athletes, they're often not the most moral. In fact, they're some of the most immoral people that we see in our society, right? So how can the people who throw themselves the most into this activity and are the exemplars at the height of its performance, right? If they're not moral paragons, if they're immoral, well, then how can sports breed morality? And if that's in question, there's almost no way that sports can produce something as divinely inspired as holiness. But that's not the argument. The argument isn't that the activity's best practitioners are the ones who best conform to the nature of the activity. They may conform to the best elements that allow them to perform, but they may not actually be internalizing the greatest value of that activity. And I'm interested in the greatest value. I'm not interested in becoming the best athlete in performance only. And that's kind of what the world of big time elite sports does, right? It selects for performance. It selects for the fastest, the biggest, the strongest, the ones who can jump the highest, the ones who can score the most goals, the most baskets, right? It does not select for the people who best conform to the nature of athletics. It selects for the people who can master particular skills in any particular or specific athletic event. So what I'm talking about is how practicing athletics in a spiritual sense leads you to becoming holy. Now, as any good philosopher should do, there's a lot of loaded terms here, so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're all talking about the same thing. When I say holy, I am referencing the way in which it's used in the Old Testament. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that the Old Testament and Aristotle and a little bit of Taoism are kind of like the foundational philosophical and theological building blocks that I rest my entire philosophy upon. And who knows, maybe it really isn't a philosophy. Maybe it's more of a theology in the end. I mean, I am talking about spirituality and divinity and holiness and transcendence. So maybe it is more accurately a theology, but maybe that's a podcast and a topic for a different day. And so holiness in the Old Testament is this idea of being set apart. It's this idea of being set apart from the normal, from the average, from the ordinary, from the carnal, from the animal, from the instinct, from the automatic, right? In the context of the Old Testament, we're talking about, the Israelites being taken out of Egypt and being brought to the promised land, the land of milk and honey. And holiness is the moral, it's kind of like the moral heft of the law, effectively. Like in Judaism, there are all these laws about things like you can't do or things that you must do. And all of these are prescribed in order to set Jewish people apart from those that surround them. It's to make them obviously different. And it's a way to make them different in a positive way, to elevate their morality, to elevate the moral tenor and the moral pitch of the entire community, but most specifically, like the hearts of each individual, right? I've been reading a lot about Exodus and the covenant, And you guys know that this is probably my favorite book of all time. It's something I've been rereading consistently for the past couple years now. And every time I go to it, it just strikes me as such a true story in so many ways. Not like accurately historically true. I mean, you can believe whatever you want about the veracity of the claims in the Old Testament, and weighing them up against like history and archaeology. I don't mean true in that sense. Like maybe not. I'm here to not interested in that. I mean true in the sense of it so obviously describes universal facets of the human experience, and it so accurately depicts human nature in terms of collectives and in terms of individuals, and in particular this never-ending battle between like slavery and freedom, or an old world and a new world, or comfort and discomfort, the lowest potential versus the highest potential, and all of the difficulties between being in one and moving to the other. And I just find it so modern and prescient in a lot of the things that I talk about when it comes to sport, especially this idea of, we'll say, like conquering the self, or of bringing out a better version of yourself, or hey, a more moral understanding of the ways in which you can act forthrightly in the world by testing who you are consistently through the training. So this idea of holiness then is being set apart and elevated morally. It's set apart and elevated morally. So playing sports can make you holy in this sense, right? And the Old Testament, the law, we're talking about like divine law, Mosaic law that's handed down, right, from God to Moses, and then told and instructed to the people. So there is this divine relationship when we're talking about holiness, like it's a special type of being set apart, it's a special kind of morality. And religion, just generally speaking, not just Judaism, but like all forms of religion are effectively like moral frameworks. They're ways in which we can understand good and bad and our place in the universe to contend in this battle between good and bad, or good and evil. Some philosophers, some psychologists, some theologians, they speculate that Earth itself is just a cosmic battleground for the forces of good and evil to play out against each other. And theoretically, one of the ways we can understand our existence is that we are spirits instantiated in bodies, so that we can test ourselves in the arena of good and evil, which may be Earth. Not suggesting that's true or that's not true, but this is an intriguing frame. This is an intriguing way to understand things. And one of the elements of my philosophy when it comes to athletic living is that I'm not here to preclude other explanations or other proofs when it comes to spirituality or existence. What I'm here to suggest is that this way of living is a good way of living. Like, it's a pragmatic, it's a phenomenological argument. Phenomenology, again, is just philosophy of experience. I don't necessarily need to know the building blocks of the universe. I simply need to know that I'm here and that I've got to move through whatever it is in front of me in terms of experiences. And I have a body. Okay, so these are just facts. And maybe it's a projection, maybe it's not a projection. I'm not interested in going fully down the existential rabbit hole yet. But for now, let's just stay in the realm of our experiences, right? Let's just stay in the realm of our experiences. And if I can provide a moral framework of how to move through the world and extract meaning and value from our experiences, and when people apply it in their lives, they end up with good results in terms of physical health, mental health, and spiritual health. Spiritual health effectively being like making good moral choices, choosing good instead of choosing bad. Well, then my philosophy's true. And that's where I'm aiming it at. So it's not a end all and be all on this is holiness and this is spirituality and this is the world. It's more like there's a million different ways that we can approach existence and life, and here's one way that, if followed, will lead you to the good life. So we can come back to Aristotle now, because his whole idea is, let's live the good life. Like, and what's the good life? What's the good life? It's conforming to virtue and conforming to the nature of the world around us, and then utilizing our unique individual experiences, right, to know more, bring more goodness, and aim towards something like happiness. And one of the ways in which we can bring all these together is through the concept of virtue. And when it comes to moral philosophy, right, there's three main branches. And I think I discussed this a little while ago. Man, I always forget these episodes now. When you get up to 50 episodes, you're starting to forget what you said in certain ones. I can't imagine what it's going to be like when I hit 100 or 200. And that's not an if, guys. That's a when. Well, there's three basic categories in moral philosophy. There's virtue ethics, there's deontology, and there's consequentialism. And these are ways in which philosophers will try to discern and determine what is good and what is bad in the world. Right? Deontology is appeal to the rules. So there's rules. Follow the rules, you're good. Don't follow the rules, you're bad. There's consequentialism. Doesn't matter about the rules. What are the outcomes of my actions? Are my action, is the outcome good? Is the outcome bad? What are the consequences of my choices? And then there's virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is, who am I? What's my character, right? What's my disposition? How do I act most consistently in the world, right? And Aristotle, he effectively creates virtue ethics. He says goodness is related to who I am. Goodness is related to the virtues that I hold. And virtues are simply like the characteristics that you are consistently known by and perform in the world. And an important part about virtue is it's not what I'm born with. It's not what I'm good at naturally. It's what I lack and then work to overcome. Or if I'm good at something, I work to improve it. So if I'm born, let's take me for example, right? And something like intelligence, right, could be a virtue. Right? Intelligence is certainly better than ignorance when it comes to like solving a problem, making good decisions, and bringing about more prosperity and peace in the world than being ignorant, being dumb, and not being able to make sense of complicated elements in the world and synthesize them and then move forward with the plan, right? So intelligence would certainly be a virtue. Ignorance would be on the other end, which would be a vice. Okay? But I was born with high intelligence. Like, when I went to school, I didn't need someone to tell me a lot of the things that the teacher was telling me. I just got it. I was the kid who would sit bored after finishing all the work in like 5 minutes when the teacher had to go around and tell everybody what to do. I was like, nope, no problem. I would get so bored in public school. I just had vivid memories of like grabbing dictionaries, reading words, memorizing state capitals, like memorizing the presidents, whatever was, if there was a list in the back of that dictionary, I would memorize it. I would look for words. Like, I just had nothing to do because I just had this high intelligence, right? But that doesn't mean it's a virtue for me. It just means that, it's one of my natural gifts. And if I don't, let's say, work to improve it, well, then I can't claim it as a virtue. I can't claim it as a virtue. Now, if I study, if I improve my thinking, if I become better at writing, if I subject my intellectual products to rigor, to outside criticisms, well, hey, then I could be said to be improving myself, and then I can start to claim a little bit of the intelligence that I have as a virtue, right? And in particular, like, there are things that I was born not good at, not good at, that, through a lot of diligent work, I now have. So, like, composure might be one. Like, I was not the most confident in myself person. I was a shy little guy. Never really wanted to be the one up front, in front of everybody. Never necessarily always like taking the lead, but when you're a professor, for example, like, who stands at the front of the classroom and who talks, right? So something like public speaking, for example, not something I was very confident or comfortable in, but through, working hard, exposing myself, having to consistently do it, you get better. And it's not like public speaking is a virtue, but something like confidence and composure, right, under pressure, yeah, that's a virtue. Those are virtues for sure. So Aristotle gives us this nice little frame of virtue, right? Virtue are these good moral qualities that allow me to most often make the right decision or aim towards the good. Like, Aristotle's not naive. He understands we're not perfect. And he understands, like, that we not only make mistakes, but that we intentionally do the wrong thing. We intentionally do the wrong thing. A lot of other kinds of moral philosophers, or even Aristotle's, predecessors and sort of his teachers, Socrates and Plato, they didn't necessarily think that once people knew what was good or bad, that they would ever choose the bad. That the problem was that they didn't know what was good or bad. But Aristotle, he's, I think, more accurate, more correct in saying that we kind of know what's good and bad, but oftentimes we just choose to do the bad thing. We choose to do the bad thing. And then we have a brain which can come in and rationalize it away. So when it comes to virtue, then, this is something that has got to be worked on, it's got to be improved, and it has to be done in a way that is difficult for the individual. Right? So it's not something that we're just, I'm good, I was born with talent, bam, I got virtue. Doesn't work like that, right? Morality isn't this automatic thing. Morality has to be diligently understood, and then we need frameworks, strong frameworks from which to apply it. That's where religion comes in. Religion gives us this powerful sense of what is good and what is bad. And if it's a religion worth its salt, like, it's going to all tend towards something very similar, which is, living by the heart. I'm Jewish, but I don't preclude the capability of other religions to derive towards sort of this ultimate truth or this universal understanding. Any religion that bases itself and its morality inside of the heart and inside of the open heart, to me, is going to lead you to whatever original source you're looking to know or integrate with. And, that's certainly the idea of holiness. When we start to talk about, like, the Old Testament conception, it's the walking with God kind of a holiness. It's God has a particular standard, a moral code, a way to live that is elevated above just the natural human instinct, the natural way in which we might have relations with each other, that we may view the environment, that we may view resources, right? That we may view, like, even something like animals and plants. Like, we've got natural tendencies. And what the Old Testament suggests is we need to be elevated above those tendencies. We need to be elevated above those tendencies. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Now we are starting to get somewhere. And one of the things that is making me want to explore this avenue is something that I read in the book that I just finished this morning. Here we go. Probably should have it with me, but it's somewhere else right now. And the book's by an author, a scholar, a political theorist. His name is Michael Walzer, and the book is Exodus and Revolution. So it's a book that looks to the political lineage and looks at a political interpretation of the Exodus story, you know, like the Jews and the Israelites in Egypt under Pharaoh and slavery, and then delivered by God and Moses, 40 years of wilderness in the desert, like the Ten Commandments, all that fun stuff. And it looks at this as a political interpretation of, you know, like oppression to freedom, and how this narrative has effectively colored and influenced all revolutionary politics in the West, and effectively, like, almost all the politics are revolutionary in this sense. But it's not like a left-wing or a right-wing thing. It's like he talks about the communists, he talks about the American founding fathers. It's a really neat book. It's a really neat book. Very political, which is good because I've been doing a lot of psychological reading, especially when it comes to like scripture and mythology, lots of psychology stuff. So this was nice to get a little bit of a political interpretation of a story that I read and read and read and interpret and interpret and interpret. But there's like one thing. There's one thing that is just absolutely like dominating the value of this book for me. And I forget where. I don't have the book, but I do have my phone, and I take all my notes on the phone. And I can just do a quick search in here. Yeah. You guys know I do this very find and note. Here we go. Virtue. Okay. So when he's talking about like the land of milk and honey and the promised land and what that represents, he ends up like making this incredibly powerful connection for me personally, as I'm building this philosophy. And he says that the idea of virtue, the Greek ideal of virtue, that Aristotelian idea that I was just talking about, he says that's the same. He says it's the same as the Jewish concept of holiness. So the Jewish Old Testament concept of holiness, of being set apart, of walking with God, right, of a moral elevation, living by good, living by truth, living by the heart, that's the same as virtue. That's the same as the classical Greek understanding. They are the same things in essence. And it's not as if I had never maybe intimated this. It was more like, oh, there's an internal knowing. You know, I have a lot of information in here and here. And when you read something like that, it just aligns it. Everything snaps into place. And for me, it was this gigantic aha moment. Like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Right? Because as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, my whole thing is about threading virtue ethics with Old Testament theology and sprinkling in a little bit of of Taoist paradoxical respecting when it comes to the building blocks of my own philosophy here. And to see another author strikingly make the connection, right? It just ding ding. It means like, oh man, you're on it. You're over it. You're so over it. Right? So if Mosaic law, the law that Moses gets, right, is this elevation of character above natural instincts or natural proclivities, this sounds exactly like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. I'm not going to go through all three, but let's just pick Plato, for example. Let's pick Plato's understanding of like a human and like a soul. And Plato likes to think about the spirit because, hey, we're in the spiritual realm, so why not talk about the spirit? Plato views the soul as a three-parter. I think I just did two, and like, get your fingers right, man, for people watching. Three. 3 parts, and he creates this image of a 2-horsed chariot. So we've got the rider and we've got 2 horses, right? So the rider's in the chariot and we've got 2 horses pulling, and that's the composition of the soul. You're the rider. You're the rider. You have this spiritive animal, right? Which would be your instincts. And then you've got this like rational part of you, which is like your ability to analyze and think. And imagine that the horse that represents like my natural instinct is like 5 times bigger. He's giant. Like he's so powerful. He's so powerful that he can just he can guide the chariot, right? He can override in almost any instance what I want to do and steer me towards this sort of like automatic natural impulse. Okay? And it's my job to work with the other horse, to work with reason, to work with the mind, right? The intellect, in order to combat and overcome that animalistic drive within me. And Plato says there's 2 ways that I can do this. There's 2 ways that I can do this. One is through philosophy, and the other is through gymnastics. One is philosophy of the mind, the other is philosophy of the body. This is where we get the gymnasium, right? This is where we get Plato's Academy, the very first higher education facility in the world that's dedicated solely to like probing with the mind. And what does Plato's Academy look like? It looks like rooms and a big open center court. And what are you doing in the center court? Exercising, lifting weights, wrestling. What are you doing on the outside? Debating, investigating, having Socratic dialogue, back and forth, looking for the premises of things and testing, definitions and categories and necessary and sufficient, and coming up with moral qualities and virtues, right? And aesthetics and all these beautiful philosophic ideas. And then you go and you do one and then you do the other, and you go and you do one and you do the other, right? And this is just predicated on these old ancient Greek gymnasiums, which had been in existence, for 400 and 500 years before Plato's Academy, which was the place of athletic training and the place of athletic learning and athletic knowing. Like Plato's Academy just kind of brings these 2 things together in its most explicit form and intentionally drives toward, right, using like the mind to overcome like the body. But the gymnasium themselves had been used as training grounds for the leaders in Greek society, for the moral leaders, for the political leaders, for the military leaders, right? Because they were all the same. They were all the same person. They were this yeoman farmer, the person who was wealthy enough to own land, could afford armor, and therefore was obligated to fight and to defend. And in order to be in the proper fitness, physically, mentally, and spiritually, was athletic training. It was athletic training. And this goes all the way back, to the classic poems of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, where sports and athletic contests are the purview of the elites, of the kings, of the princes, of the heroic warriors, as a way to test their moral qualities. Gosh, I miss teaching about this stuff. It's a good thing that my daughter appreciates Greek mythology so that we can talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey and all these fun things. Because there's so many instances that are flooding into my mind. I don't want this to be taken over by Greek history, classical Greek and archaic Greek athletic history. So let me just pull one example. Let me pull one example from Homer. Right? And Homer, he's like the fountain of this classical Greek civilization that gives us people like Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and all the mathematicians and the dramatists and the architects and all of those incredible minds and thinkers, right, that came from this period in ancient history. So let's go to Homer and the Odyssey. And just, if you don't know the Odyssey, I'm sorry, but you should. The Odyssey, it recounts Odysseus. He's the king of Ithaca. There's all of these Greek kings that go to Troy. They fight the Trojan War. That's kind of the Iliad. The Odyssey chronicles Odysseus and his journey back from the Trojan War, which is not a straight shot. It's sort of like this 10 years of wandering. He upsets Poseidon, and Poseidon, he's the god of the sea, and you got to sail everywhere in ancient Greece, across the Aegean, in the Mediterranean there. And, Poseidon just keeps blowing him off course and sending him off to these crazy places, and the Odyssey is really like a story within a story, because he, in the 9th year of his 10th year of journey, he washes up onto the shores of a Greek island, the Phaeacians, and they recognize him as a king, but they don't really know who he is, and they're just inviting him to be an honored guest, and they're showing him, the best of their civilization, the best of their kingdom. And once, Odysseus is effectively known, he then sits down and he tells the king of the Phaeacians all the things that have happened to him that lead up to this point, right? And that's kind of where the Odyssey opens up. But before they even know who Odysseus is, one of the things that happens, right, because they have this big gigantic banquet, he's this honored guest, and they want to display like that they are a very prestigious Greek nation, right? There isn't one Greece. There's Greek kingdoms. There's Greek city-states. It's not like all of Greece like you would think today. So the Phaeacians, what do they go to first? What did they go to first in order to proclaim that they are this prestigious Greek kingdom? They go right to athletics. They go right to athletic competition, right? They want Odysseus to know that, hey, we are killer athletes here. Like, we know what athletics are about. We know how to practice them. And when we show you how good we are at performing them, it will exemplify the high moral standard. It will exemplify the high worth of our kingdom. And Homer, famously, right, gives us this quote that lives on. We're talking like 2,800 years ago, guys. There is no greater glory that a man can win, but with his feet in the games. That's a paraphrase. It's not exactly yet, but almost anything in English from that ancient Greek is a paraphrase, because it's not identical. It's not exact translation, but it's something like that. It's like the greatest glory for any individual comes in the sporting arena. Any individual. The greatest glory comes from the athletic arena. And, the story, it unfolds. They're throwing discus. Some guy steps up. He hurls a giant toss, and then he boasts and he taunts Odysseus. Odysseus is kind of like, man, I'm tired and old, and yeah, I used to be pretty sporty, but I've just been beaten up by the ocean and war, and I'd rather not. And then, like, the boasting really happens. Should I really do this, guys? Should I pull up the quote right now and read it verbatim? No. Let's test the dome. Let's test the brain. I used to teach this. I used to literally recite this quote, like 4 times in a day when I used to lecture on this stuff. Basically, this guy, Euryalus, he steps up after he's hurled this discus. Odysseus has said, yeah, I don't really feel like doing this. Sorry, guys. He basically just sneers him. He says, yeah, makes sense to me. You don't look like an athlete. You look like some master peddling salesman who cares only about the cargo. You're no athlete. He's like, all you care about is riches. All you care about is making the deal, like swindling the person. You only care about the wrong things in the world. You're not an athlete. You're not an athlete. And this legitimately gets right into Odysseus. It goes right at his heart. And he is beyond pissed off. He is beyond angry. And he gets up, and the rough translation is something like, how dare you? How dare you? I am no ninny at sports. In fact, I was the best in my day when I was young. And effectively, just to get you to recognize and have respect for somebody, I'm going to get up and I'm going to show you. And then he picks up a discus, right? Which in the story, as it says, is about twice as big and twice as heavy as the one that this guy just threw. And he throws it twice as far. Now, there's also potentially the help of Athena. Athena is, she's the goddess of wisdom. And she loves Odysseus. And she hates Poseidon. And it's the Odyssey. You've got to read it, guys. You've got to read it. Go. Get the Odyssey. Read it. So maybe he's got a little help from Athena. Either way, doesn't matter. And then he literally sneers at everybody. And he says, anybody come at me. I don't care what you pick. You want to do wrestling? You want to do a foot race? You want to do javelin? You want to do boxing? Doesn't matter to me. I will beat everybody. I'll be all comers. Except for I'm not going to challenge the king. I mean, he's smart. He's not about to upstage the king who's hosting him. It's a good way to be tossed in the dungeon, tossed in the cellar. And not only does this prove Odysseus's virtue, right? This is the explicit response of the king. The king stands up and he says, thank you for displaying that. He's like, the man, he sneered and aimed directly at your arete. And anybody, when challenged would do the same. They would respond exactly as you had. And you've clearly shown you're superior in sports. So we're not even going to do that anymore. Now let us regale you with song and dance, and we'll show you how we are the best at song and dance, right? Because it's just clear Odysseus is way superior in the realm of sports. And he even proves this in the Iliad. The Iliad, right, is the very first written description of athletic competition in the world, kind of solely for its own sake, although it's done as funeral rites for fallen soldier. But the thing that differentiates this from other athletic events that other, all cultures around the world have tests of physical strength and sort of games to pit men against each other. What differentiates this archaic Greek account in the Iliad is that, they compete for prizes, but the prizes are not important. The prizes aren't important. And in fact, in many of the instances, you see people giving up prizes in order to maintain virtue or to maintain character. And that's exactly what this Phaeacian king is mentioning here about Odysseus, right? It's this guy went directly after your arete. Hey, that's a word I've said before. I believe it was even on the last pod or 2 pods ago. Arete is the Greek word for virtue. Arete is the Greek word for the most excellent virtue, the prime virtue, the virtue above them all. Sometimes it's translated as virtue itself. Other times it's translated as excellence itself. But athletics is the activity that best generates this arete within an individual. Athletic competition is the thing that best brings about virtue or excellence. And another way to think about arete is this combination of body and mind to aim for moral righteousness, So it's virtue in accordance with living the good life. It's virtue in accordance with morally upstanding behavior and attitudes. It's virtue that elevates you. The most out of all the other virtues. And we might think what are some of the prime virtues that you get through athletic training? Courage, number 1, discipline, number 2, the ability to recognize sacrifice, right? The ability to persevere, have fortitude, strength, intelligence, wit, sagacity, ingenuity, creativity, passion. Like all of these good things, they all kind of, again, emanate from like the center of my body too. I mean, except for intelligence, that's up here. But athletics was the thing that gave you the best mix of them all. It was the thing that gave you the absolute best mix. So it was like theory and practice combined into one activity. So does it any reason to doubt why Plato put gymnastics as a key component of education, and he taught people through the academy to do this? No, it's not at all. Because for the ancient Greeks, virtue was best engendered and generated through athletic competition. And here's where it gets funky, guys. Virtue is the same as holiness. Virtue is the same as holiness. And I really went hard on this idea, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, where I talked about, this was the Deep Philosophy Podcast, and I was talking about how physical experiences with the proper intention allow me not only to better know reality, but actually allows me to bend reality. It allows me to manipulate reality. And I was talking about this idea from the Old Testament of afflicting the soul. That is the fasting. That is the denying of the bodily urges in order to elevate the spirit towards moral righteousness. Maybe I'll say that again because I'm starting to get a little freaked out. The affliction of the soul is a way for us to deny the body, which is the immediate source of temptation or vice or sin, and to elevate our spirits towards moral righteousness. And in the Jewish case, this is what we do to gain atonement, at one-ment with God, where we are only able to release and have our sins absolved if we are forthright and honest about our responsibility and our obligations, which is exactly what an athlete does in terms of taking on the responsibility of the training in order to perform. And this idea that one meant, well, in the ancient Greek world, the athletes could achieve that one meant. Athletic perfection is the moment of personal transcendence. Hey, I did a podcast on that too. This is really cool. It's really cool how we're creating hyperlinks on this platform here. Athletic perfection for the ancient Greeks was a moment of personal transcendence, and it was represented in this idea of touching the fingertips, of breaking through the temporal plane and reaching into the world of the gods, right? Just for a little bit of a moment there, just for a tiny little break, right? And so these ancient traditions, virtue and holiness, right? They may be a different grammar, they may be a different language, but they are the same. They are the same thing. And whether you're religious or not religious, this idea of harnessing the body in order to elevate the spirit, I think is a universal. I think this is a universal when it comes to religion. Like, all of the shamans, all of the holy and religious leaders, they are, in one way or another, moving above just the carnal desires of the body, right? And there may be pragmatic reasons for this, but there's also this clear spiritual element of afflicting the soul, of denying the body or of pushing the body in order to claim moral righteousness. But here's the kicker. It's got to be intentional. You got to know what you're doing. You got to aim properly. You have to be internally aware of what it is you're doing and why it is you're doing. Otherwise, you're simply blocked out from it. This is why the elite athletes are very rarely moral paragons. You're more likely to get a Michael Jordan, right? You're more likely to get a Michael Jordan who's a world beater, but a horrible human. You're more likely to get cheaters. You're more likely to get people who will sell out themselves rather than stand up on courage and principles. There's not a lot of Novak Djokovic's out there in the elite sport world, if you know what I'm saying. Because there's no intention. Their intention isn't to afflict the soul. Their intention is to get the bag, to get the W, right? And winning can be reflective of a moral position, but it's not always, and it's not absolute. So ultimately, when we are now thinking about this idea of holiness, right, of being set apart, of rising above the natural and the pragmatic, and that may be called sort of like sin or vice or the bad, well, it's clear that sport has this important role to play. And we can think of sport as like the organized version, but I think it's more about what I talked about 2 episodes ago. It was 2. I think it's more about physical exertion, and I think it's about intentional physical exertion. And sport is the most formalized way to exert yourself physically, within a context, right? Within a context, and with rules. And we've talked about rules, and we've talked about boundaries, and we've talked about freedom, and I've talked about all these things in the first 50 episodes. But when, embarking out now on actively spreading, actively coaching through, actively prophesizing, proselytizing, probably a little bit of both. It's very important that we get the source right. It's very important we get the source right. We must be intentional, right? Let's go back to Aristotle. When thinking about virtue and morality, we aren't looking at a list. We're not looking at the outcomes. We're looking at individual character. We're looking at individual character. So how does any individual know what is good, what is true, what is righteous, what's virtuous? And I've definitely talked about these 2 concepts before, but, not in this one. And I probably wanted to do this earlier on, but, without a template, without a structure, the mind just kind of goes. It improvises. That's why I love just hitting record and having a topic and seeing what happens, right? You can see my brain working in real time, right? I don't have to rely upon a well-organized outline that I spent hours researching and putting together so that I can hit record and then it all just falls out. This is a lot more interesting. At least for me. I hope it is for you. I'm getting more and more listens every week, so apparently it's working. Maybe. I'm going to keep going either way. These 2 concepts from Aristotle really help us zoom in on the moral quality of sport and how they can actually aim us towards holiness. The first is onteleshi, and the second is eudaimonia. Onteleshi is this internal desire. It's this intrinsic drive, right? It's me bringing about the best of myself, right? It's kind of like my passion. It's what I was born to do, in a sense. And then eudaimonia, which is the highest good attainable for any individual. So there's like this internal drive towards excellence, ontology, and eudaimonia, which is the highest possible good attainable for any individual, which is not any one individual in terms of we all aim towards the same highest good. It's like I have a different highest good than you do. And it's related to this ontology because I'm naturally interested in different things than you. This is why like curiosity and passion and like interest and attention are very powerful when we're looking to tap into this like inner signal. It's like, well, what's the inner signal? What's the inner truth? Like, where am I being directed? Where am I being aimed at? Where do I get to go hard? Right? One of the things that this inner signal does is it clears the path for me to improve myself dramatically. Like there's all of these different ways we can clearly be improving ourselves, but some things come more easily to me than to others, right? Like I don't find it that hard to sit down and read. I don't find it that hard to go out and do like an hour run on the trails. Like I enjoy those pursuits. I'm naturally inclined, but virtue doesn't mean I just like, oh, I'm tilted here, so I just go do. It means, no, now I'm obligated to go hard. Now I'm obligated to improve myself in these areas where I have a natural inclination, right? It's easy for me to push harder in these areas, which means I'm obligated to go because other people can't go as deep as me. Other people can't go as deep as me. And that's my kind of inner signal that ontology and eudaimonia are entwining themselves together. And they're aiming me towards the best. They're aiming me towards this ultimate moral action, this goodness, this rising above to reach this highest potential. This idea of like, I don't know, walking with God or something like that, of living out the highest spiritual existence. So I'm interested, I'm directed, and I can go deeper through adversity, through challenge in these particular areas. So it's no wonder that I'm talking to you now on a podcast about the philosophy of sport. I love reading. I love the world of the abstract. I love synthesizing complex and disparate streams of information into a synthesized narrative of understanding. And I love physical challenge. I love them. I also love art and expressing myself. So it's like you put these three things together. This is kind of like what I should be doing. This is exactly what I should be doing. And what's the evidence? Like, what's the proof? Well, when I throw myself deeply into all these three areas and then I pour it out of my heart to serve others, the lives of other people improve. Those would be like my coaching clients and the athletes that I help train. When their lives improve because of my ability to do all of these things on my own, well, this is clearly righteousness. This is clearly a moral play. Like, and it doesn't mean that everybody who plays sports or everybody that reads can produce this kind of morality. It's this personalized understanding of what a moral action could be. Anything can be a moral action in the world if I'm passionate about it, if I care about it, and if I direct it with this internal love of doing the activity for its own self and then recognizing the highest good that can come of it by pouring it out into others. Right? So anything in theory could become a highly moral activity when we're talking about this idea of virtue. We're talking about this idea of virtue. Right? So Aristotle gives us this really powerful philosophical backing into the moral quality of sport, right? Virtue. The ancients, Homer, they direct us to this idea that arete, the most excellent of all the virtues, is the prime reason why we codify and we train athletically. Historically, in ancient Greek society, that is evident by the hoplites and democracy and the fact that these tiny little armies of free citizens defeat gigantic armies of despotic tyrants. You know, the whole oppression and freedom narrative, like the slavery and the freedom thing. Free peoples, right? Free peoples defeating tyrants. Hey, sounds a little bit like the Exodus story. And this Jewish idea of afflicting the soul and of walking with God and of holiness right? So to sort of bring this one back and land it down, because I want to go trail running. I got more things to learn, guys. It's pretty clear that sports can lead to holiness. And it's also clear that maybe their ultimate aim and purpose. That's what the people who created them thought. And, I've talked about the classical Greeks. I've talked about the ancient Jews. But there's this really interesting connection between the two that I think all my Christian brothers and sisters will appreciate. And this is the embodied sense. So it's like Greek philosophy and Mosaic law. When you combine the two together, what do you get? You get something like a moral Hercules, right? If Moses is the hero of the Old Testament and Hercules is the greatest of all the mythological heroes, the demigods, and he is, another little wrinkle of time. Hercules is the patron saint of the gymnasium. No big deal. It's fine. Don't worry about that. In the ancient Greek world. Lots and lots of synergies, right? Like, well, we got this. What do you got? We got this moral exemplar, right? Who elevates the spirit, and then we've got this physical conquering. We got this physical conquering. If we're thinking about Moses and we're thinking about Hercules, I mean, put them together. Who do you get? Put them together, and who do you get? Up on that cross there, guys. Up on that cross. And, I'm not going to get into exactly all my theological beliefs, but I think, again, it's like we have these clear moral building blocks that I have to overcome the body. In order to reach a higher plane of moral righteousness. And sport is this perfect activity where I learn to overcome my body. And if I just intentionally aim it at this spiritual place, right, of willpower, of good and evil, right, of fortitude, of the heart. I mean, it's pretty obvious that practicing sports like this is going to make me holy. Like, it's going to set me apart, and it's going to elevate me. It's going to make me stand away and apart from everybody else. And one final shout out, and then we'll wrap this guy up. Shout out to Mr. Australian tribal training legend, Mr. Andrew Parker. There's a lot of Americans on our team, but it's an online team, and Andrew's been one of the longest members on our team. And he's just absolute killer, number one. But I appreciate his ability to bring in some Commonwealth language and sensibilities and aura with a bunch of Americans. Like, I'm Canadian, he's Australian, got a little British thing going on. It's great. But he dropped this incredible voice message into our group chat, and he was effectively likening each of us to these heroes, these ancient heroes. I don't think he was specifically talking sort of like in the Greek sense, but just like if you think about tribes, right? There's that one member of the tribe who's the greatest example of the tribe, and maybe if there's a conflict with the neighboring tribe, you send out that guy to do battle with the other guy from the other tribe, right? Like, there's that one example. And he reiterated beautifully. He's like, hey guys, like, that's us, right? What we are doing is so difficult, and it's so apart from the ordinary in terms of, number one, subjecting ourselves as adults to disciplined athletic training when we're not professionals, number one. But why we do that? We don't do it so we can get belt buckles and race medals and tattoos and PRs, right? It's not chicks dig the long ball. We're doing it so that we can become specifically better individuals, better husbands, better fathers, better employers, employees, business owners, faith leaders, like all these other areas outside of sport. That's the aim of why we want to do it. Like, we push hard inside of the arena in order to become more righteous outside of the arena. And he did this incredible job of reminding everybody that, hey, this desire to not be ordinary, to not backslide into all of the pathetic ways that people settle in the modern world. If you talk about people that are overweight, they don't exercise, right? They never compete. They never crack open a book. All they do is consume, consume, consume. There's no creating. I'm getting bigger. I'm not getting stronger, right? I just follow what everybody else tells me to do. Like, I don't have opinions that aren't put into my head by other people. Our use of the athletic training is the specific thing that sets us apart. And it's because of our intention. It's just not the fact that we train. It's why we train. It's why we train. So Mr. Parker, I think, beautifully gives us a nice bookend here to this argument. Do sports make you holy? You damn well better think that they do, because I'm telling you, once you actively aim physical exertion and activity towards the open heart and to the spirit and the soul that's inside of us, that's the only place where you can go. That's the only place where you can go. It's part of it, right? You don't have to work at it. It's not like you got to sit there and think, oh, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, it's good to have reflection. It's good to make things explicit. But if your aim is true, right off the bat, you get to just live it. You literally just get to live it. And then reflecting, speaking, writing, conversing about it, that's just ways to level up quicker and faster together. But you're already embodying it. You're already living it. So do sports make you holy? If I haven't convinced you, then I didn't do a great job. But ultimately, I don't think it's arguments. I don't think it's words that do the convincing. I think it's the actions. I think it's the testimony of the people who I've turned on to this kind of thinking and this type of exercising. It's their lives. It's their improvements. And if you want to test it out for yourself, well, I give lots of reasons on how to start, lots of ways on how to start. I give lots of tips, but you can always get in contact with me. If you're interested to see what this looks like in your life, your ontology, your eudaimonia, your affliction of the soul, your walking with God, whatever it is, I dropped a link in the show notes to my Substack. Hit me up there. Send me a message and let's talk. All right. That's it for number 50. Number 51 is going to be super duper cool. I got a philosopher, one of my good friends, who's going to come on, and he's going to interrogate me and possibly tear a lot of the things that I've said in the past couple episodes to shreds. And we'll see. I have an inclination that's not going to happen, but that's the plan. So I'm excited for 51. I'm excited for 50. Thank you, everybody, for coming along on this journey, on this podcast, broadly speaking. To me, it's pretty incredible to be able to have a platform and to put something out and to have people listen. Doesn't really matter how many people are listening, because I think the quality of the people that are listening is high, and I think that what I'm saying is being applied by the high quality people that are listening, and that's way better than having just a big megaphone, having people nod, but not actually improve their lives. That's for the ego. I'm not interested in that. So thank you, everybody. Peace and love. We'll talk to you in the next one.